name is Brad Aeon. I'm an assistant professor at University of Quebec in Montreal. I've been doing research on this topic, time management, for at least the past 11 years now. And it's a topic that I find obviously fascinating, but not just because it's my topic, but it's because it's a topic that I think speaks to all of us. We all need to manage time. And it's not a recent phenomenon either. Like human beings have been managing their time for the past 40,000 years at least. Um, and obviously, since the pandemic, a lot of people have, started working from home. And when you start working from home, well, your day is not as structured and regulated by work as it used to be. So people realized that they needed to manage their own time, because what usually happens, and this is what happened with society in the past 60 years or so, is that time, believe it or not, used to be managed for us. I mean, some of you may remember there used to be a time when, when you wake up on Sunday morning, what do? If you're a Christian, that is, you go to church, whereas today people can, wonder whether they should go to brunch or watch Netflix or stay in bed all day. So in a sense, people's time was managed for them by religion, by society, by governments, by family. There used to be a time when family dinner time was non-negotiable. You had to be there by 5 or 4:30 or even 6. Entertainment was non-negotiable either. You wanted to watch a particular TV show in the 90s or in the 80s, you had to be there, say Monday at 6 p.m. That, again, non-negotiable. Whereas today with Netflix, you can watch your favorite show anytime, anywhere. So we have a lot more freedom over how to use our time. But the downside is that we also have a lot more responsibility to manage our own time. And that's a lot of work. And that's why time management, yes, time management is getting harder, whether we realize it or not. You might see those popular books, at the bookstore saying, you can have a 4-hour work week, or you can be a productivity ninja. It's super easy. It's not. It's really not. We have a lot more time management responsibilities than in the past. And we also live in a world where there's a lot more, you're supposed to achieve a lot more. We may not realize this, but we're vastly more productive than the average person in the 1950s. Like multitasking, having a schedule, having a to-do list, all those things were not particularly prevalent in the 1920s, simply because people did not need them. There was not, life was not as fast-paced. And so the need to manage time from a personal perspective, that's relatively new. So that's why I spend a lot of time, explaining, or at least making the science of time management accessible to as many people as possible, because I think it's important. I think that many of the blogs, magazine articles, popular books, and even seminars on the topics can be helpful, but not necessarily. Some of the techniques that are offered are sometimes useless or even counterproductive, if not downright harmful. There's not a lot of science in time management books, let's put it this way. And I think that's problematic. And that's one of the main reasons why I decided to do a PhD on this. I think bringing evidence and rigorous research to this topic can make it infinitely more useful to the people who need it the most. Now, I see that we might have some questions in the chat. Oh yes, the Mentimeter code. So I'm just going to type it again. 312. There you go. Now, a little history of time management, before, and again, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate. I'm just going to start with a little brief history. Time management, believe it or not, started around the 8th century in a small Italian monastery. And you might be wondering, like, why would monks need time management of all people? I mean, it's not like they live particularly, stressful lives, or they're not particularly pressed for time. And that's true. But when you think about it, monks want regularity. They want predictability. They want discipline, not just for practical purposes, but for salvation purposes. In many Catholic communities, living a methodical life was the key to salvation, the key to, going to heaven in the afterlife. And so it was around after the 8th century that this particular community, the Benedictines, introduced not one, but two inventions that would revolutionize the West. The first one was the mechanical clock, and the second one was the schedule, this idea that there's a time and place for every activity. The person that was at the origin of all this was Saint Benedict of Norcia in Italy. All this has happened in central Italy. It would later spread to like Italian merchants and other classes of people, and then to the rest of Europe. And that's how time management was born. Today, this is what Norcia looks like, the monastery. There was an earthquake, I think, in 2014 or 15. So it's, they're rebuilding it. But yeah, the Benedictines are still there. They're still using the same schedule today. And I'm really proud to say that I took these pictures. I went there, I think, summer of 2018. It was a pilgrimage of sorts for me, because obviously it's the birthplace of time management and it's my area of research. And the reason why I wanted to go there was to get to the source of time management and what it meant to the people that essentially invented it. And I was actually quite surprised, because the prior there, Father Cassian, told me that he was actually pretty disappointed with the way we think about time management today. He said it's become this very rational way of producing more and more, using time as a metric to just become more and more efficient, more and more productive, get more things done every day. And he was like, where does it stop? It's just an endless growth cycle that has no particular overarching goal. Whereas in his case, and in the case of many of the monks, like you manage your time in, I guess, perhaps a spiritual way. You manage your time for God, you manage your time for salvation, for, I guess, purification. And he said that time management today is essentially philosophically empty. And he finds that problematic. And that's also one of the reasons why I started studying the philosophy of time management. And one thing that I find particularly interesting is this idea that time management, our idea of time management, may be completely wrong. Let me give you an example. We think, for instance, that time management is about work, it's about performance, productivity. But what if time management was about something else, something perhaps a bit bigger than just work and performance? There's two researchers that did this huge review of all the research we know on meaning in life. And what they found was that meaning in life essentially boils down to three things: coherence and predictability. So if you have a life that's fairly stable and predictable, then chances are you're going to have a meaningful life versus someone who has a more, I guess, erratic or chaotic life. If you feel that your behaviors, your day-to-day behaviors, are guided by goals that you value, then again, chances are you're going to experience some sense of meaning in life. And finally, if you feel that your existence matters, for instance, by perhaps investing in something bigger than you, like raising a child or contributing to perhaps a charitable cause, you're again going to feel that your life is meaningful. So what it means is that this idea of meaning in life is not particularly abstract or nebulous or philosophical. It can be very mundane. Very often people that have a strong sense of meaning in life do very, very mundane things in their day-to-day lives. They're not necessarily religious or spiritual. They just have a coherent life. They're goal-oriented, and they have a feeling that their existence matters. Now, what is time management if not all this? When you think about it, the very act of managing time or scheduling your time, structuring your time, makes your time more coherent and predictable. That's one of the goals of time management, to make your time more stable, more regular. When you use time management, you also presumably use it so that your every hour of your day or every day of your week is oriented towards some kind of goal that you value. And finally, managing time, by definition, implies that you feel that your time matters. And that's why I was not particularly surprised when we did this meta-analysis last year, when we found that time management actually has a very, very strong correlation with a sense of purpose and meaning in life. A much stronger correlation than the link between time management and performance, which really made us think, if this is true, then do we have the right definition of time management? Is time management really about productivity and performance? Or is it more about mental health, well-being, happiness, and a sense of meaning in life? So I think little by little, with empirical and historical data, we're finally realizing that time management is perhaps not what we think it is. And so my definition of time management right now is simply the act of using our time in accordance with our values, beliefs, and philosophy. This is what I call the principle of coherence. If you use your time in a way that's in line with what you believe in, what's important to you, then in my book, that's good time management. Do we have any questions? Yes, I see that we have 3 questions so far. Let me just, by the way, feel free to unmute yourself as well if you have any questions at any time. You're not gonna interrupt me, just, you don't have to raise your hand either. Just unmute yourself and ask me a question whenever you want. Let's see. So first question, how can non-academics tell the difference between good time management advice and bad advice? It's a real good question. Well, first of all, there is a book on, it's not really a list of bad time management advice, but it's full of examples of bad time management advice. It's called Hacking Life by Joseph Regal. That's Reagle. Excellent book on the, I guess, when productivity becomes a bit too extreme, you know, like tips like, well, if you want to be more productive, you have to induce in yourself a sense of urgency by, for instance, holding in your pee, you know, like don't go to the bathroom for like 2 hours and you know, you can somehow you're going to be more productive. Don't do that. I don't think that's a medically sound piece of advice. So I think many of them are on the surface, many of the tips seem on the surface very reasonable, but many of them can actually be very counterproductive. There's another one that recommends that people use a Pavlok. It's some kind of wristband that you put around your wrist. And every time you access, say, Facebook or some other time-wasting website, it delivers a very painful electric shock. That tool is actually pretty popular now. If you want to Google it, it's Pavlok with a K, Pavlok. It's selling like hotcakes, surprisingly. So yes, good time management advice, bad time management advice. I think if you want good time management advice, I think usually you might want to stick to books by scholars. Like, for instance, if you have procrastination problems, I recommend the book The Procrastination Equation by Piers Steele from University of Alberta. I know that those books are not as popular as, say, the 4-Hour Work Week, and that's not because they're bad. It's just because they don't make these sensational claims like, you know, like you can easily achieve a 4-hour work week. I think academics are reasonable people, and they're not gonna, you know, make overly sensational claims in their books. Great, thanks for this great question. Should time management include time where there is no goal? If not, why not? Should time management include time when there is no goal? You mean like leisure? Because so one thing that we know from psychological research is time management is great for work, but please don't use it for leisure. it's really gonna ruin the fun and the very purpose, really, of leisure. If you feel that your leisure time is bounded in time, like I'm only gonna take a break on my weekend from, I don't know, 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. It's not gonna feel like rest or leisure, really. If you're on vacation and you need a little bit of structure, like you want to go to the beach, you want to go to the museum, and so on, you can have some kind of rough scheduling, just a short list of things you want to do during the day, like maybe beach in the morning, museum in the afternoon, but no specific timing. Because there's, obviously there's a balance to be struck between having a little bit of structure just to orient yourself during the day, beach in the morning, museum in the afternoon, and not go to the other extreme where, I have to go to the beach at exactly 10:22 a.m. and be done by 11:23. That defeats the purpose of rest again. So I hope I answered your question. If not, please, you can either unmute yourself or ask another question. What do you personally think about the phrase time is money? I think it's very, it's a highly reductive phrase, really, because time, in my opinion, is infinitely more valuable than money, even from an economics perspective. Yes, because money is theoretically infinite in terms of amount. It's like it's not a finite amount. Theoretically, you can have as much money as you want. I mean, theoretically, you can generate as much money as you want. Whereas time, we all have only 24 hours in a day, and we all live on average, 80 to 90 years at a time. So time is painfully finite, which makes it, in fact, it's probably your most, it's not your most finite resource, but it should be your most precious resource. And once it's gone, unlike money, once it's gone, it's gone. Like when someone has wasted your time with something, we're rightfully angry at them because that time is gone forever. Whereas, if you lose, say, $50, well, theoretically, you can still make $50 by working or by, I don't know, stealing. So yeah, those concepts, those resources are fundamentally different. And I think saying time is money is very, it's a bit of an, I think it really cheapens the value of time when you compare it to money. However, I do think that money is time. One of the, they say money doesn't buy happiness. That may be so, but it definitely does buy time. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why rich people may potentially have more time than less rich people, because, you may have heard of that saying, we all have the same hours in a day as Beyonce, meaning that, Beyonce is very, very productive, but you should be too, because we all have the same 24 hours. So what's your excuse? Well, I think that saying really overlooks the fact that Beyonce is A, very rich, and B, she can afford nannies, chauffeurs, personal assistants, chefs, really a whole army of people that literally make time for her. And I think that's something that we should be mindful of, like class inequality and disposable time. But if, and Laura would probably agree with me, if you want to be happy in life, always, always, always use your money to buy time rather than use your extra time to get more money, if you want to be happy, because having more free time is usually a lot more conducive to happiness than working extra hours for extra money. Great. Next question. What tools would you recommend to manage your time? Excellent question. So assuming you're a knowledge worker, you probably have to process a lot of information every day. And whether we realize it or not, information consumes our attention, and attention is obviously our time. So if you spend a lot of, if your attention is constantly if your attention is constantly bombarded with emails, magazines, texts, documents to read, books, that's a lot of time. And so how do we deal with that in the 21st century, in an age where obviously we suffer from information overload? Well, we have to find a way to organize our personal information. Let me give you an example. I'm going to try to stop this presentation here. I'm going to use a tool. So one thing that really works is personal information organizers. You may have heard of them, like OneNote, Evernote, Notion. They're really good because they act as a second brain. Like you can offload all of your personal information on them, whether it's work projects, grocery lists, recipes that you like, references for a book that you may be writing. So let me just share my screen here to show you how it works. Every time I show this to people, they fall in love with OneNote, just because it's a great way to organize all of your information. So the way it works is you start with a series of notebooks, and each notebook is about a particular aspect of your life or domain of your life. So for instance, discovery is where I store all of my quotes or articles I'd like to read, like it's discovery oriented. Research is obviously all the research projects I'm engaged in. Personal is personal. Public academic is everything that has to do with books that I would like to write for the general public. Media is my interviews with media. That's the consulting side of business, my teaching duties, and this is something else. So just to give you an example, if I click on research, I have a lot of different sections, and all of these sections, each of these sections is a research project. So if I click here on theory of time management, I have this to-do page here, and it's my to-do list. This is something that helps a lot of people. This idea that instead of having one master to-do list, try to have one to-do list per project, because otherwise your master to-do list can get very unwieldy. So this is the to-do. It's all the things I have to do, like write up the core element section, blah, blah, blah. And it helps me keep track of everything I have to do, all the ideas that I have. And yes, you can even take photos of, book chapters and make notes. It's really great. And if you want to go to say, personal, self-development, curiosity. If I go to cooking, for instance, you can store your recipes and everything is instantly accessible. What I like about it is that the more you use it, the more it's going to turn into this, personal search engine. So for instance, that you have stored at some point quotes about Seneca, or from Seneca rather. So here I can just search Seneca and quotes. And there you go. These are all my quotes by Seneca. So this is very helpful if you have, if you take a lot of notes, if you, if there's a lot of references that you need for either research or writing books or whatever it may be, it's extremely, extremely useful. So that's one of my favorite tools, just because it helps me organize all of my personal and professional information. It's free. It's really not that complicated to master. It takes on average 1 to 2 hours. If you go on, I think it's made by, yes, it is made by Microsoft. So training is free, and it takes just about an hour or two. And it's, in my opinion, it's really time well spent, because once you learn how to manage your information, that's 50% of time management in the 21st century, in my opinion. So great question. Let me just share my screen again to show you the audience's questions.
And thanks, George, for mentioning in the chat that students and staff who are part of the university have access to all of the Microsoft Office suite things, so that is readily available. So, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Nat. So it is there. Yeah, and I do the same thing, Brad, by the way, when it comes to recipes. Can we trade afterwards? I've got a whole digital notebook full of like different things that I want to try. So
yeah.
No.
Yeah, no, it's It's really good. So it's one of my favorite tools. My other tool is it's a to-do list, and it's called Todoist. I'm gonna here Todoist. The reason why I like it is because, well, A, it's free, and B, it's extremely fast. It's really, really fast. You know, like most apps, you have to like enter a task and then, you know, toy around with all kinds of like parameters, like when do you want to do it? Is it urgent? Is it important? And so on. This one, it takes an average 1 to 2 seconds to add a task, simply because it has a natural human language recognition. So for instance, if you say, I want to water my plants every Wednesday at 9 p.m., it's going to recognize your human language as saying, repeat this task every Wednesday at 9 p.m. automatically. I don't think it should take really more than 1 to 2 seconds to note down a task. So yeah, that's why I like it. And then my other tool is simply Google Calendar, that I use as a calendar and as a schedule. I'm, yeah, I mean, I don't use fancy tools. It's just OneNote, Google Calendar, and Todoist. The rest is time management is mostly about mindset, not necessarily the tools. The tools can be helpful, but only if you use them with the specific intent, in my opinion. Great. So great question. Next question. How can we best integrate our beliefs, values, and spiritual goals with our career? That's a good question. Well, A, it's going to depend on your career and how much leeway it gives you in terms of fulfillment. I deliberately chose to be an academic because this is the kind of job where I can do exactly what I want. I don't think I would be as happy if I were, I don't know, in a sort of job that gave me a lot less autonomy. So integrating is great. I think it's also important to realize that if your current job does not satisfy you or is not aligned with, again, your beliefs, values, and spiritual goals, maybe try to plan an exit and find a job that is a bit more aligned, because everything is not about time management. You know, even if you manage your time extremely well, it's no substitute for the fulfillment that a job can give you, especially a job that's aligned with what you believe in. You know, no amount of time management can cure your the I guess the despair, not the despair, the cure the, I guess, discontent that comes with being in the wrong place. So, and I mean, time management can help in the sense that very often people don't think about leaving their job because they're like, you know, it's too much work. I don't have time to think about it. Time management can help you carve out the time to really think about your life and take some perspectives. One thing that I do once a month, every Sunday morning, I take some time to reflect on my life, to take stock of all my ongoing commitments and see if they're still very much aligned with what I want. If that's not the case, I ruthlessly remove anything that's not conducive to what I want out of life. So there you go. Great question. Even if I manage my time according to my beliefs, values, and priorities, I think, why do I still feel under pressure and unproductive? That might be a case of, I would be very curious to know if if you're typically use a schedule or a to-do list to organize your days, because very often what happens is people use a to-do list and they list all of the things that they would like ideally to do during that day. And inevitably, they end up doing maybe 40, 50% of their tasks, and then they feel bad because they couldn't finish the rest. Well, first of all, in linguistics, we know that in almost any language on the planet, when we talk about time, we use spatial terms. That's why, for instance, we say that the meeting was very long, or that we will meet outside of business hours, or that we will push deadlines back. We always use these very spatial terms to talk about time, and that's because we literally think about time in spatial terms cognitively. What that means is if the most intuitive way for us to think about time is to think of it as space, then the most intuitive and easy way for us to manage time is to visualize it. And that's why a schedule is so important, because it's a visual representation of what your time looks like. It's very easy to see that if you only have a 4-hour empty block on Monday afternoon, you're not going to engage in a 7-hour, obviously you're not going to engage in a 7-hour project. And because it's visual, it's very easy to see. And it helps you keep a realistic mindset when it comes to time management. Because with a to-do list, it's very easy to because they're just items with no duration, with no timing. It's very easy to say, yeah, I'm going to do this, I'm going to finish this project, I'm going to move on to this other thing. But it's wishful thinking, really, most of the time. And I think our tools tend to influence our mindset. So I think using a schedule really might help. And then if you feel guilty for being unproductive, what I can tell you is I did a PhD on this topic. I have a PhD on time management. And on an average day, I do maybe 60% of the things I had planned to do. That's the average. And that's just because, stuff happens. Very often tasks take longer than usual. Sometimes you get interrupted. Sometimes you, feel a bit under the weather. Do I feel guilty and unproductive? Not at all. Because to me, the goal of to-do lists and schedules and time management in general is not to do everything, but it's to be aware of what it is that you haven't done. I think what's really anxiety inducing is when you finish your workday and you have this nagging feeling that you haven't done something, but you don't know what it is really. And I think that's that can be very anxiety inducing. And also, it leads to lower productivity down the road because, you forgot this key element and you only remember, you only find out when it's too late. So the purpose of to-do lists and schedules is to really remind you, yes, you haven't done this today. Well, you can reschedule it for tomorrow, for the next week. And that tends really to alleviate anxiety by a lot. So that's my advice to you. Let's see. How can you prioritize less time-sensitive tasks? Sorry, how can you prioritize less time-sensitive but still important projects and tasks? Really good question. So very often we're torn between urgent tasks that might not be very important, like responding to an urgent email, and tasks that are not urgent, but are very important, such as maybe starting a side business that's very important to you, or writing a book. So what I do in that case is prioritize them first thing in the morning. So first thing in the morning, I work on my book, even though it has no deadline, there's no sense of urgency attached to that task at all. And the reason why I do this is because I know that, well, first of all, our levels of willpower tend to decrease over time. And so I know that there's no way I'm going to write that book in the afternoon. All kinds of things can happen between the morning and the afternoon, all kinds of things that can derail you. Unexpected meetings, something not working, someone asking you for help. So there's a lot of things that could make you unable to write your book by the end of the afternoon. So anything that's important but not urgent, I do them first thing in the morning. That's very important. One other thing that I do is, and this is from a paper that I really like called the mere urgency effect. I'm going to write it here in the chat if you're interested in the actual research. When you have a choice between task A and task B, always ask yourself, not what's the deadline, but what's the outcome? So if I were to do task A, respond to this urgent email, what would happen? And what would happen if I didn't do it? Versus what would happen if I wrote, 3 pages of my book? Versus what would happen if I didn't do it? And very often you will see that if you factor out the time dimension, the deadline, the urgency, very often we realize that, yes, it would actually make a lot more sense to work on something that's important rather than urgent. So it's really about how you frame activities. The moment we start, ironically, the moment we stop thinking about time is the moment we start making better decisions about outcomes rather than deadlines. That was a great question. Thank you. Let's see. What do you do if someone else's poor philosophy ethics impact on your own ability to manage your own time? There's 2 answers to this question. It really depends on who the other person is. If it's your partner, it's tough. If it's your colleague, the answer is communication. Very, very important. One thing that, and again, not everything is about time management. One thing that really helps people when there's a temporal conflict is really communication. And most importantly, communicating expectations. Like, when are you available? How do we work around deadlines? Like, are you a last minute type of person, or do you want to be done the week before? It's very, very important to communicate these things. Very often what happens in teams is not necessarily conflict after this type of communication, but finding a compromise. So for instance, if the person is a bit, the procrastinator, maybe that person can, and you're not at all, like you're perhaps a precrastinator, you want to be done as soon as possible, then maybe somewhere in between would be a good compromise for both of you. And I think as long as you're dealing with reasonable people, a compromise is always possible. Great question. So communication when it's your colleague. When it's your partner, well, I don't think I'm qualified to give any advice on this particular point. How do you incorporate the unexpected into time management, especially if unexpected challenges, urgent tasks pop up regularly? Very good question. You reshuffle things around. So whenever, I realize that I have to walk to, somewhere far, and I realize I won't be able to work on my research, won't be able to prep my classes, then I just find another time for those blocks, or I delete them. Like sometimes, yes, you have to, there's something that you plan to do for that day, and well, you can't do it. You just either delete it or you reschedule it. If that happens very frequently, I think that's either a problem of, if you work from home, maybe there's some things that you might want to talk about, as a family or as a couple, or whatever it may be. If it's within the context of an organization, then obviously you're not the problem. It's the organization. If you keep getting like last minute emails to deal with something, that's poor management in the sense that it's poor organizational management. And there's interventions that are designed to deal with that, like make processes a bit more predictable, a bit more manageable. But as individuals in a big organization, there's only so much you can do when the workflow itself is unpredictable. And again, communicating with your boss, with your colleagues can really help if you work with reasonable people. I find my to-do lists just get longer, and I often paralyze myself with the amount I have to do. Common wisdom is to break down tasks, but that just overwhelms me more. Any tips for breaking the cycle? Yes, if you're If your to-do list is consistently too long for you, that's a strong indicator that you have too much on your plate. One thing to do again is take some time, perhaps Sunday morning, and reflect on your ongoing commitments and ask yourself, is there anything that I can remove from my list of priorities? Because again, if your to-do list is overwhelming and consistently overwhelming, that's a workload issue, not a time management issue. And I know it's painful to disengage from certain projects. I had to do that. I have to do that very often, in fact, both in work and in my personal life. And yes, it is, it's very unpleasant. To give you an example, recently I had to stop. I bought a guitar and music theory books, and I started practicing my scales and everything. But then I realized that it was taking too much time, and I didn't have enough time for, reading my books, spending time with friends, partners, and so on. I was like, something's got to go, and well, it was the guitar. And yes, it was very unpleasant because that meant, probably never going to get to be a good musician. But the net effect is that I'm now happier because I have more time and I feel more in control of my time. One of the main reasons why time management makes us feel good is this sense of perceived control over your life, over your time. And if you have too many things to do on your to-do list, then I think that calls for a little bit of reflection. Very, very important. Thank you. That COVID and the enormous amount of spare time it gave us threw up any interesting new findings in your research. So interestingly, time management has affected our subjective sense of time. A lot of people felt a lot more bored than usual. People felt that time was passing more slowly. One thing that it did do was it forced us to improve our time management game. Because again, it's one thing we know from research in the 1970s and 1980s is that when people lose their jobs, they don't just lose their jobs, they also lose the time structure that comes with the job. You wake up at a certain time, you shower, you commute, you meet up with your colleagues, and you go back home. So there's a certain daily rhythm that we're accustomed to. And that daily rhythm really gives us a sense of orientation, of structure in our daily lives. It's almost like a map, a temporal map. And it helps us, move around in the temporal dimension. But when people lose their jobs, it's almost like they're thrown into this weird new world territory without a map. And it feels very disorienting. And that's one of the reasons why unemployed people feel depressed, anxious, and so on. In fact, there's one paper where lack of time structure had a larger impact on their mental health than financial deprivation. So lack of time structure was worse than lack of money. And I think it's more or less similar to what a lot of people have experienced with COVID. Overnight, a lot of people had to transition to working from home. Many people were utterly unprepared to work from home with, children, inadequate workstations, and so on. But most importantly, no real time structure. A lot of people were not too sure what time to start and, most importantly, stop working. That's why, on average, I think, depending on the country, people worked about 2 to 3 extra hours per day for free. It was bad. From a mental health perspective, it was really bad, because the thing with time structure, the time structure that comes from work, is that it's not just about orientation, it's also about boundaries. When people work 9 to 5 in a physical office, there's a physical barrier between work and home. You leave work and you go home. Whereas when you work from home, then the boundaries are blurred, and it's very hard for people to impose those boundaries. That's why time structuring is so important, because you impose your own temporal boundaries. For instance, at 5 p.m., no matter what, I stop working. It takes a bit of discipline, but I see it as an investment in your mental health. During COVID and even now, I have very, very strict shutdown times. No matter what happens, I'm not going to work, even if there's something urgent. It's not about work ethic. It's really about mental health and self-care. And I think we should prioritize self-care over work ethic, especially now. So that's my take on COVID and time management. What is an effective way to estimate how long a task will take? There's one semi-effective way, and it's extrapolating or learning from experience. If in your experience it takes you about, I don't know, 4 hours to write a paper, say, then you know that there's a good chance that the next paper will also take about 4 hours. But to be frank, what the research on planning fallacy shows, planning fallacy is this bias that makes us utterly ineffective at estimating how long a task will take, applies to everyone, believe it or not. Even seasoned expert project managers have a very hard time accurately estimating how long a project will take. So if you have a hard time estimating, timelines and so on, it's not you. I deliberately refrain from estimating how long projects will take because I know, for me at least, it's futile. I just try to do it as fast as I can, but giving you an accurate estimate, no. I think it's very hard to do. And what the research shows is that it's very hard to do even for the people whose very job is to estimate how long a task will take. So again, just maybe judging from experience, but what I would recommend instead is try to work on a particular project in short bursts every day. Probably no more than 90 minutes per project. If only because you've probably had this experience where you've been working on something for like 2, 3, 4 hours, and then you hit a wall and you think that by staying at it for an extra hour, you're gonna make a breakthrough, and it doesn't happen. And that's normal, because with time, your brain suffers. No, it's called goal habituation. So you're working on the same goal, same project for an extended period of time. Your brain gets bored. It needs more stimuli. It needs to work on something different. That's why on average I work on 3 to 4 different projects every day. And it's not because I have ADHD. It's just because working on one project per day usually is not a productive way of doing it, because working on just for like 90 minutes or less on a project and then transitioning to something else, you're going to be able to work in a very focused way on 4 different projects versus working very unproductively on one big project a day. I mean, to me, the option A sounds a lot better. And in fact, some people call it slow multitasking. So instead of like constantly shifting between different apps or different projects, you can shift between different projects for like every 90 minutes or so. And so that's why they call it slow multitasking. And usually it's a lot more conducive to performance. So it's almost, at least here, it's almost 10 a.m. So I'm going to maybe answer 1 or 2 more questions and then we can wrap up. What were the prior's reasons for his statement? I think the prior is very well versed in the history of time management. And I think he's very aware that the way we use time today is probably not the most spiritually oriented one. So that's why I think he was not particularly pleased, about what the way we manage time. I'm a procrastinator. My partner is a workaholic. Are good time management practices essentially a way of meeting in the middle? Not necessarily. Through communication, maybe it'll turn out, it's gonna, maybe procrastination will be the way to go. Maybe being a workaholic, it really depends on your situation, on your partner's ability to make concessions. It really, it's very, it's not always in the middle. Sometimes it is, but not necessarily. But again, communication really, really, really helps. And who knows, maybe you both are going to adopt time management techniques that are not, that don't feel natural at first, and it can really change the whole dynamic. So good luck. And finally, how can you best tackle other people's demands on your time, particularly when they organize meetings that clash with other meetings already in your calendar? This actually happened in a hospital in Tennessee, where this was the problem. And what they did was essentially have a sort of a meeting with the schedule administrators to tell them essentially, this is not okay. You know, we hate being double booked, and we would like to have a little bit more autonomy over our time. So again, this sounds like an organizational issue rather than an individual level issue. Talking to your boss, talking to your colleagues, that usually helps, especially again, if you work with reasonable people. So there you go. I know there's a couple other questions, but just in the interest of finishing on time, I'd like to maybe wrap up. Tyler, did you want to intervene?
Yeah, I think, thank you everyone for all the questions. It's great to see the interactivity, and thank you, Brad, for taking time to answer these questions and share everything. Do you have any contact information or ways that you prefer to get in touch over email or social media things in case people have additional questions? We can put that out there perhaps.
Oh, sure. I'm available on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Twitter, and what I do is multiple times a week, I share new research on time or time management. So if that's something that you find interesting, you can follow me. You can also send me an email at time@bradaeon.com. I'm going to share email right here. And yeah, feel free to ask me any and all questions about time management. I would be more than glad to answer all of them.
Great. Yeah. And we will, we've got this recorded, so we'll put this online on our YouTube channel for ThinkLab. So feel free to share that around to colleagues and everything. But I found this was a lot of fun. We could do this again. Maybe we'll get a panel of people working on like-minded things. And next time you're in our part of the world, Brad, hopefully you can come by and we'll give you a tour of the stuff around here in Cambridge with a big ugly clock with a big bug on it that you should probably see. So yeah. Yeah, great. I think we'll leave with that. So thanks, Brad, for your time. Hope you have a good rest of your day. Thank you, everyone, for coming. And then more talks coming. I've got a few in the pipeline, so those will be coming out in the next month or two. So stay tuned through other things. And I hope you have a nice upcoming weekend.
Thanks. You too. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Sorry, I'm on my phone. It won't let me leave.